Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Doesn't this drama that goes on in the news make you a little sick? People are doing everything they can to hurt the president. There's a whole cadre of folks that were Hillary Clinton supporters, and they think that President Trump is illegitimate. Now they're going after his nominee for the Supreme Court, and they're saying, well, Kavanaugh is illegitimate. And guess what they're saying? They're saying, well, he will be sitting as a juror in a trial of the president who is going to be impeached, and therefore Kavanaugh cannot be appointed to the Supreme Court. I mean, this is talking about a stretch, but it's pointed, was shown in a very cogent article today in the paper. The jury is 100 senators, not a Supreme Court justice. The chief judge of the Supreme Court is the presiding officer, not another justice. And for Chuck Schumer to play a card like this is just ridiculous. But I think some of the people who are supposed to meet with Kavanaugh have canceled, but I think that Mitch McConnell has got to jam that thing through. And they did away with that ultimate weapon they had, the nuclear option, they used to call it. And the Democrats did it. Harry Reid did it, so he set it up so 51 senators can confirm. And this man is highly, highly qualified. And meanwhile, he had some crucial meeting on this week, and Senate Republicans say the hearings are on track. Abigail Robertson brings us this latest in the Kavanaugh showdown.
By the end of this week, Judge Brett Kavanaugh will have met with more than half of the Senate, including Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. As many Democrats still refuse to meet with the Supreme Court nominee, now they want his hearings postponed, citing the connection between President Trump and the legal troubles of Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen. After Tuesday's courtroom outcomes, Hawaii Senator Mazie Hirono canceled her meeting with Judge Kavanaugh, while Schumer called for the hearing to be postponed altogether.
At the very least, it is unseemly for the President of the United States to be picking a Supreme Court justice who could soon be effectively a juror in a case involving the President himself.
An aide of Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley's office told CBN News this is just a delay tactic by opponents of Kavanaugh. Carrie Severino from the Judicial Crisis Network agrees.
Right now, 4 of the sitting justices plus Justice Kennedy were appointed by presidents who at the time were under investigation for one thing or another. So the idea that that's something novel is really, not fair.
Also this week, Kavanaugh met with Republican Senator Susan Collins, a key swing vote, who called their meeting productive and informative. The pro-choice Collins appeared pleased on where Kavanaugh told her he stands on Roe versus Wade.
He said that he agreed with what Justice Roberts said at his nomination hearing, in which he said that it was settled law.
Justices Samuel Alito and Neil Gorsuch used similar language when pressed on the issue during their hearings. Still, pro-life advocates hope the confirmation of Judge Kavanaugh would one day lead to a change.
We pray that one day the Supreme Court will recognize the dignity of the unborn.
Despite the legal drama surrounding the president's former associates, Senate Republicans remain confident Judge Kavanaugh will be confirmed before the midterm elections. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
I think we can be absolutely certain that Kavanaugh is going to be confirmed, but if you want to get involved, by all means, call or write your senator because they're the ones that have it. And all you've got to do is pick up the phone, call the Senate office building. They call it the SOB, Senate office building, and tell your senator how you stand on this, including Democrats. But there were 2 Republican senators who were in doubt. One is Lisa Murkowski from Alaska. The other is Susan Collins from Maine. And Senator Collins apparently is satisfied with Judge Kavanaugh, and I think Lisa Murkowski will be the same way. Roe versus Wade, in a sense, is settled law, but nevertheless, there's so many variations now. The interpretation of Roe was very draconian, and now it's being challenged on many fronts, and this is a totally different thing. But this judge should not be determined on abortion. It's not an abortion decision. It's a decision having to do with the role of the judiciary in our life and whether the judges should abide by a written constitution or whether they ought to be free to interpret the Constitution according to sociological trends. And that's been the big problem. And Kavanaugh is a strict constructionist, and he's the one that would make a tremendous judge. So again, call that number, call the number for the Senate, and let the senators know your point of view. I think it's very, very important that unfortunately, we don't have that number up. We've gotten all that nonsense.
I think if they go to CBN.com,
well, they don't have to do that.
News.
Put the number on the screen, for heaven's sakes. I mean, it's just a Senate office building. It's the United States Capitol. Call the Capitol and ask for the office. If you're there, you go. 202-224-3121. It's easy to remember. And that's the number to call, 202-224-3121, and ask for your senator. You've got two of them for the state you live in. Hopefully you know their names, but if you don't, you can look that up. But it's very important. And I think that, two things are happening. Number one, Mueller is going far, far afield of his initial mandate. He was mandated to study Russian involvement in our election, in the presidential election that has just passed. That was his mandate. He was not mandated to study the IRS rulings having to do with a businessman, but he did. And of course, they've gotten Manafort. It wasn't Mueller that did it, but it was a federal prosecutor. They found him guilty, and I doubt very seriously if the president has the political capital right now to pardon him. Somebody would say they ought to pardon him, and I don't think would not be a wise move for the president, certainly not now. But nevertheless, Mueller should not be messing with these things. They're not part of his mandate. And he begins to go after Manafort, and then he's going to go after Roger Stone, and then he's going to go after somebody else, and then he's going to talk about the D.C. madam, and he's got all these people. I mean, this is not part of the deal. He was not put in office for that job, and I think it's very important to rule him in, but who's going to rule him in? Well, the guy who appointed him, that's questionable, and yet, nevertheless, we'll see what's going to happen. But, all right, the other thing that shocked us recently was a lovely co-ed from out in Iowa who was murdered. Now, let's take a look at that. She was, she's in that inquiry is getting stronger support from the White House. John Jessup has more.
That's right, Pat. The suspect in the Mollie Tibbets murder appeared in court Wednesday facing a first-degree murder charge. 24-year-old Christiane Rivera is accused of kidnapping and killing Tibbets, then hiding her body in a cornfield. Authorities say Rivera is in the United States illegally and that he used a false ID to get work. The owner of the farm where Rivera was employed says they screened him through an older system instead of Homeland Security's newer E-Verify. President Trump and other Republican lawmakers say the case highlights the need for stricter immigration laws. Press Secretary Sarah Sanders offered prayers and condolences to Tibbets' family and friends during the White House press briefing Wednesday.
The Bible tells us in Psalms that the Lord heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. The Tibbets family is hurting, and they're on the hearts of all Americans, and we are grieving with them.
The judge ordered Rivera to be held on a $5 million cash bond. Energy Secretary Rick Perry sees energy independence as a reachable goal for the United States. Under the Trump administration, there's also a push to export more of our energy to other countries, specifically natural gas and coal, as the White House rolled back regulations on that industry this week. CBN's Jenna Browder has that story.
President Trump in West Virginia coal country after his administration moved to ease regulations on the state's main industry.
The Affordable Clean Energy Rule would give states the broad power to control the carbon emissions coming from their coal-fired power plants.
We lost tens and tens of thousands of coal mining jobs in this country due to these extreme regulations under Barack Obama.
Economist Stephen Moore sees it as a good move and praises the new direction on energy.
Well, this is the best untold secret out there that over the last year, the United States reduced its carbon and greenhouse gas emissions more than any other country. Now, people are going to be shocked to hear that because, wait a minute, Donald Trump pulled us out of that Paris Climate Accord.
He points his finger at other countries seen as major polluters.
There's not going to be any progress whatsoever in terms of reducing greenhouse gases if China and India and other developing countries are not aboard.
Bob Deans with the Natural Resources Defense Council disagrees.
These countries are late into the development game, but over the next decade or so, you're going to see their numbers start to come down as these investments in clean energy economy really take effect.
While Deans believes this week's action is a big step backward, the administration sees it, and efforts to create more clean energy, as major progress.
15 years ago, the United States was dependent upon a lot of countries for its energy. Today, because of innovation, because of technology, we're the #1 oil and gas producing country in the world. American LNG is now going into 30 countries on 5 continents. The economics of that is powerful.
Energy Secretary Rick Perry is referring to liquefied natural gas, a cleaner form of energy that's plentiful in the United States.
The idea that we can go into Europe and deliver United States liquefied natural gas as an alternative source of power to countries in the EU instead of having to rely upon Russia. It is an incredibly powerful tool.
Moore says the one hang-up is having the pipelines and ports to export all of this American energy. If the administration can build up the infrastructure, he says get ready for a Saudi America.
Let's make North America the energy source for the world, not the Middle East.
In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Thanks, Jenna. Pat, it looks like we're witnessing an amazing reversal of fortunes here.
Well, it's amazing. You see, the Obama people had a rule that we were not allowed to export our natural gas because the idea was that if we began to export it, would raise the price. But we have a great surplus. So who is sending natural gas to Europe? Gazprom, a Russian corporation that's under the control of Vladimir Putin. And of course, Trump made a big thing of talking about Angela Merkel being in the pocket of Gazprom, and that this was a pipeline that was going to tie Germany into Russia. So now with LNG, what do? They pressurize natural gas, and it gets to be very, very compact, and of course it's extremely explosive. But nevertheless, we have a company called Cheniere Energy down in the Gulf, and we've got others, but there are also companies in Europe that are taking natural gas and they're moving it around the depots. They're moving around, and they compress the natural gas, and then they can put these compression units out and tie them into pipelines and then feed the natural gas out. We have a huge surplus of natural gas. It's a clean-burning fuel. But I'll tell you, in terms of pollution, I have been in Beijing on a Sunday morning, and I spoke at a church. It was a big crowd of people, and the air was so polluted you could hardly stand it. I mean, Beijing is just loaded with pollution. The Chinese have a hideous problem, and why should? And yet we are the ones who are now the clean-burning country, and China was outside that Paris Accord. So it needs to be, China needs to do something, and they recognize the problem because it's a serious health problem for the Chinese. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we in this program have been watching for some years now something called the Ring of Fire. There's a Pacific plate that runs again into the North American plate and all the other plate. You see, they call it the Ring of Fire. It starts way down in New Zealand, that area, and it goes all the way through Indonesia and then up all around to the Aleutians, up into, and then all the way down to South America. Now, that's the Ring of Fire. Well, just this week, that ring began to be active. And it is a very, very serious thing that will have a major impact. So John has more on that story.
That's right, Pat. This week's powerful earthquake in Venezuela is forcing people out of buildings and their homes. It's the third in a series of quakes in the area known as what Pat was just referencing, the Ring of Fire, and it has some experts worried. The 7.3 magnitude quake was the largest to hit the country in more than 100 years, but fortunately caused no deaths or major damage. More than 70 earthquakes have struck in the Ring of Fire over the past 3 days. A strong 6.7 tremor struck the South Pacific island of Vanuatu Tuesday, and a third earthquake hit the U.S. coast of Oregon Wednesday. That one was a 6.3 magnitude quake. Pat?
All right, you see that, and I'll show it here again. It was on the screen. This is a triangle that shows Venezuela, and it shows Vanuatu out in the Pacific, and it shows Oregon. There was a very, very perceptive article in the New Yorker written a couple of years ago about what they call the Cascadia Subduction. And subsequent to that article, it was very well written, a pastor has said that he's got a revelation from the Lord that there's going to be a tremendous flooding area into Oregon. Well, if this subduction takes place and there is a major earthquake off the coast of Oregon, it will bring an enormous tsunami, not unlike what happened, you know, when we had that terrible tsunami that hit the Far East. So we're looking at a major thing, but it's interesting. It's a triangle. Goes from Venezuela to Oregon to Vanuatu in the Pacific, and that's where the major earthquake problem is. Of course, it bypasses L.A., but they've been talking about the big one due to Los Angeles in some time. But this one from the Cascadia region can be even worse. And as I say, people are having prophetic word. I haven't had any such prophetic words, so I'm not claiming it, but the pastor who did so seemed to be a very responsible type of person. And it is really scary to think about.
Well, when more than 70 quakes have hit that Ring of Fire in 3 days,
yeah,
something's
well, this one in Venezuela is the worst in the 20th century or the 21st century. 7.3. They've never. It's the most powerful. That is an enormous. That's a real boomer, and so well, just keep your eyes on it. But I'm not telling anybody to move from Oregon, but nevertheless, the experts, so we're trying to get hold of an expert in this particular science, who is the acknowledged expert who in the Oregon area, who can tell us more detail from a scientific standpoint. But not only is science having it on the one hand, but we got to say, I've got a prophetic word on the other, and they coincide. Well, also in the Pacific, when hurricanes get to a Category 5, they've got winds of about 160 miles an hour, and they are devastating, really devastating. And the Hawaiian Islands are now getting ready for a major, major hurricane.
That's right, Pat. Turning from earthquakes to tropical storms, Hawaii is bracing for a Category 4 hurricane expected to hit land within the next 24 hours. Satellite imagery shows the massive storm system carrying 150-mile-an-hour winds, making it one of the strongest storms to ever come this close to the islands. Hurricane Lane's path turned toward Hawaii Wednesday, prompting warnings for the Big Island, Maui, and Oahu, though it might not make a direct hit. The U.S. Navy is moving its ships and submarines, and islanders are collecting supplies and preparing for possible evacuation. Well, as that storm turns, some Americans still feel the impact of Hurricane Harvey, which hit the Texas Gulf Coast a year ago. Vice President Mike Pence visited the Lone Star State Wednesday to offer support and to check in on continuing recovery efforts there. CBN's White House correspondent Ben Kennedy has the story.
Last year's storm brought a week of death, destruction, and loss. During that time, many turned to their faith, including the second in charge right here behind me at the White House.
Even in the midst of the storm, you were there.
Vice President Mike Pence returned to Rockport, Texas, revisiting First Baptist Church, which was hit hard by the storm.
It's profoundly inspiring to see the way this church and this community rose to the challenge in the wake of Hurricane Harvey.
Pence also met with FEMA workers, disaster relief volunteers, and residents of the area. CBN's Operation Blessing jumped in last year long before the floodwaters receded. The team organized more than 6,000 volunteers to hand out food, water, supplies, and even offer prayer.
Christians all over the world who descended upon Houston put feet to their prayers and literally outpaced FEMA, helping people restore their lives.
Jeremiah Johnson's home was in the disaster zone. Your backyard turned into a lake. Water was creeping up to the front door. How did you get your family of 5 out safe?
Well, thankfully, I have 4-wheel drive, but truly, our home had become a moat. Just to put it in context, I'm a father of 5. Our triplet boys were 13 months at the time. We ran out of our home in our PJs, no less, jumped in our family vehicle, put it in 4-wheel drive, but 5 of the 6 evac routes, they were impassable. They were flooded.
Turns out Johnson got his family out safe. While his home did get damaged, others felt a much worse impact. It's been a year. When driving around town, do you still see signs of the destruction of this hurricane?
You do, and unfortunately, there are still people who are not back in their homes. And so if you're watching this and you still want to serve, there's still opportunities for you to serve. And honestly, pray. Prayer makes a huge difference.
Governor Greg Abbott proclaimed September 3rd last year as a day of prayer in the wake of the storm. Vice President Pence said a total of 31,000 federal personnel deployed across the state as part of an all-hands-on-deck effort by the federal government. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, the White House.
1 year later, and the rebuilding continues. Pat?
Well, it's just amazing what's happened. And I want to tell you, Operation Blessing was there on the scene helping mobilize hundreds and hundreds and actually thousands of volunteers. So that's one of the things. I mean, whenever there's a disaster of that magnitude that strikes, Operation Blessing is there in your name, in the Lord's name, but as your representatives. So again, it's Operation Blessing, disaster relief, and believe me, if a big one is coming, earthquake or whatever happening in Hawaii, we want to be there to help those people. And I said earlier that was a Category 5 hurricane. It's been downgraded to Category 4, but it's still a monstrous storm.
Absolutely.
With killer winds. And it's just like the planet is just showing some wrath against the people. It's simply amazing what's going on. And we've got something else. They're not only hurricanes, winds, floods, but also fire.